Bills Mafia, buckle up, because the wide receiver room in Buffalo just turned into the most chaotic, most fascinating storyline in the entire NFL. We've got a blockbuster trade proposal that could bring in a former first-round talent for pennies on the dollar. We've got a legendary former Bill still sitting unsigned in free agency while a hated FC rival reportedly circles him. And we've got a young receiver on the current roster fighting for his entire career this season. 3 massive storylines, 1 wide receiver room, and by the time we're done today, you are going to understand exactly why this might be the most important position battle on the entire Buffalo Bills roster heading into 2026. Let's start with the move that already happened, because it changed everything. Buffalo went out and landed DJ Moore from the Chicago Bears, instantly handing Josh Allen a brand new primary target and reshaping the entire hierarchy of this offense. That alone would be enough offseason news to keep this fan base talking for weeks. But here's the twist nobody expected. Analysts are convinced Buffalo isn't done. Not even close. Enter the name that has suddenly become one of the most talked about trade targets in the league, Ihmir Smith-Marsette. Now, if that name doesn't immediately ring a bell for casual fans, buckle up, because his backstory is wild. Smith-Marsette was a first-round selection by the Carolina Panthers, brought in with the hope that he would become a cornerstone weapon in that offense. It hasn't worked out that way, not even close. Across his first 2 NFL seasons, the production simply hasn't matched the draft capital that was spent on him. Last season, he finished with just 35 catches for a little over 360 yards and 3 touchdowns. His rookie year was actually slightly better statistically, 49 catches, right around 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. For a first-round wide receiver, those numbers are nowhere near where Carolina hoped they would be. But here's where it gets really interesting for Bills fans. Buffalo was reportedly already interested in Smith-Marsette back during that very same draft process, before ultimately going a different direction and selecting Keon Coleman instead. So now, 2 years later, we've got this incredible twist of fate where analysts are floating a trade that would send Smith-Marsette to Buffalo in exchange for nothing more than a future 4th-round draft pick. That is an absolute steal if his talent translates. Evaluators still rave about his size, his athleticism, and his ability to stretch a defense vertically down the field. And when you pair that vertical speed with a quarterback like Josh Allen, who has one of the most dangerous deep balls in football, you can start to see why this idea has people excited. One analyst even went as far as suggesting that Smith-Marsette could ultimately prove to be a smarter long-term investment than the very player Buffalo picked over him back in that draft. And here's the part that should really make your jaw drop. That same analyst floated the idea of Buffalo potentially recouping additional draft capital by shipping Coleman off to a rebuilding franchise entirely, essentially blowing up and completely reconstructing the young receiver room from scratch. That is a bold, dramatic idea, and whether or not it actually happens, it tells you just how much uncertainty is swirling around this position group right now. And it doesn't stop there. While all of this trade speculation swirls, Buffalo has also quietly been adding bodies to the competition, bringing in a receiver who was recently let go by the New York Jets. As it stands right now, heading into training camp, Buffalo's receiver room is absolutely stacked with names. DJ Moore, Khalil Shakir, Joshua Palmer, Keon Coleman, Mecole Hardman, the newly added Jets cast-off, and a handful of young hopefuls all fighting for a roster spot before the Bills open their 2026 season on September 13th against the Houston Texans. This is going to be one of the most fascinating training camp battles in years, and if Brandon Beane's front office believes there's still untapped potential sitting on the roster, even a low-cost flyer could quietly turn into one of the smartest moves of the entire offseason. But here's where this story takes an emotional turn, because while Buffalo weighs adding new young talent, A familiar face from the franchise's recent glory years is still sitting out there in free agency, completely unsigned, with training camp bearing down fast. I am, of course, talking about Stefon Diggs. Let that sink in for a second. One of the biggest surprises of this entire offseason is the simple fact that a receiver of Diggs' caliber remains without a team this deep into the summer. Yes, he's entering his age 33 season, an age where teams start asking hard questions about decline. But make no mistake, Diggs is still viewed around the league as one of the most polished, most sophisticated route runners in the entire sport. And now, a certain AFC rival is reportedly circling him hard. According to a report from Bleacher Report, the Baltimore Ravens should be aggressively pursuing Diggs before training camp officially opens. And when you look at Baltimore's recent history, that theory actually makes a lot of sense. This is a franchise that has made a habit of bringing in accomplished veteran receivers year after year, stacking proven talent around Lamar Jackson in an effort to finally push through to their first Super Bowl appearance together. Diggs would fit that pattern perfectly. He's coming off another season with over 1,000 receiving yards, and he genuinely believes he still has what it takes to be one of the premier number 2 receivers anywhere in football. Pair him with Zay Flowers in that Baltimore passing attack, and suddenly the Ravens' offense looks a whole lot scarier. Now here's where it gets complicated and painfully personal for Bills Mafia. Should Buffalo have made a real push to bring Diggs back home? During his 4 seasons wearing the blue and red from 2020 through 2023, Diggs didn't just play well. He became one of the greatest wide receivers in franchise history, racking up over 5,300 receiving yards and 37 touchdowns in just 66 games. Those are legendary numbers. Buffalo ultimately traded him away to Houston back in 2024, closing what felt like a complicated, sometimes tense chapter. But earlier this year, Diggs made headlines of his own, publicly expressing nothing but gratitude toward the organization and the fan base that once made him a star. He admitted, in his own words, that he still loves Buffalo, that he misses the city, that he wishes things had ended differently between him and the franchise. He even praised Bills Mafia as one of the most passionate fan bases anywhere in football and expressed hope that both sides could eventually find a way to move forward together. Naturally, comments like that reignite every reunion rumor imaginable. And here's the nightmare scenario every Bills fan needs to sit with for a moment. What happens if Diggs signs with Baltimore, and he becomes the missing piece that finally pushes the Ravens over the top and into the Super Bowl, while Buffalo falls short yet again in that exact same season? The second guessing, the what-ifs, the endless debate about why this franchise didn't at least explore a reunion, all of that would intensify overnight. Sure, Buffalo's current receiving room, led by names like Gabe Davis in years past and now Khalil Shakir in the present, has plenty of talent. But there's something irreplaceable about a receiver who already has the chemistry, the route-running precision, and the championship-level experience that Diggs built during his prime years in Buffalo. For now, nothing is imminent. No deal is close. But his free agent status remains one of the biggest storylines to monitor as training camp approaches, especially as Buffalo continues exploring every possible external option at the position. Which brings us to the third and maybe most personally dramatic storyline of them all. A player who is already on the roster, a player Buffalo already invested serious draft capital into, is walking into what might be the single most important season of his entire career. I'm talking about Keon Coleman. No player on this Buffalo roster is likely facing more pressure heading into 2026 than Coleman, and remarkably, he's the one who has admitted it out loud himself. In his own words, this season is essentially make or break. Another disappointing year, in his own estimation, could mean the end of his time with this organization entirely. That kind of brutal honesty from a young player is rare, and it tells you everything about how real this pressure has become. One respected NFL insider recently named Coleman as the single Buffalo player with the most riding on this upcoming season, and the criticism surrounding him goes way beyond just what shows up on the stat sheet. Reports have surfaced describing recurring punctuality issues, multiple benchings throughout last season, and even instances where Coleman was made inactive entirely for certain games. And when you actually look at his career production, the concern starts making a lot more sense. Across 26 NFL games, Coleman is averaging just 2.6 receptions and under 37 receiving yards per game, with 8 total touchdowns to his name. Those are simply not the numbers teams expect from a former second-round investment. And then, almost out of nowhere, Bills ownership added fuel to this fire. Comments resurfaced suggesting that Buffalo's own general manager had reservations about drafting Coleman in the first place back in 2024. Since then, the organization has made visible efforts to publicly back their young receiver, but the expectations surrounding him remain sky-high regardless. When Coleman was recently asked directly about all the outside criticism swirling around him, he brushed it off, pointing out that none of his critics would actually be lining up against him on the field on Sundays. His message was simple. He shows up, he works, and he lets his performance speak for itself. But not everyone inside the building is treating this with kid gloves. Veteran offensive lineman Dion Dawkins has already made his feelings crystal clear, stating bluntly that the era of excuses and coddling is officially over and that Coleman needs to mature after everything that happened during his benching last season. Even outside evaluators have started flagging him as a potential major disappointment for Buffalo heading into this year. And to make matters even more competitive, the arrival of DJ Moore has only intensified the fight for targets in this passing offense. Add in Khalil Shakir and tight end Dalton Kincaid, both of whom are expected to see plenty of action from Josh Allen, and Coleman suddenly finds himself scrapping for every single opportunity that comes his way. Here's the part that should give Coleman some genuine hope, though. Reportedly, head coach Joe Brady has already turned down trade offers involving him because the coaching staff still firmly believes there is untapped potential sitting inside this young receiver. But belief from the coaching staff will only carry him so far. Entering the third year of his 4-year rookie contract, Coleman is standing at an absolute crossroads. If he finally breaks out and lives up to the promise that made him a top pick in the first place, he could transform into a foundational piece of this Buffalo offense for years to come. If not, this could very well be the beginning of the end of his time in Buffalo. So there you have it, Bills Mafia. A potential trade for a cheap, talented young receiver. A legendary former star possibly reuniting with the team, or worse, landing with a hated conference rival. And a young player fighting the biggest battle of his career just to keep his roster spot. This wide receiver room is a powder keg. And how it all shakes out could quietly define Buffalo's entire 2026 season. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were sitting in Brandon Beane's chair right now, would you pull the trigger on a trade for a talented young receiver like Smith-Marsette? Would you make a real push to bring Stefon Diggs back home instead of watching him potentially join an AFC rival? And do you honestly believe Keon Coleman can turn his career around this season? Drop your answers down in the comments below, because I read every single one of them. If this video kept you hooked, do me a favor and smash that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel Buffalo Docus so you never miss a single update on this Buffalo Bills receiver room drama, and I'll see you back here very soon with the next big story. Go Bills!